go. Hey guys, welcome to Jerry's Live. As always, I'm your host, Amy Gardner-Dean. We are at episode 80, which, you know, ironically, I looked back, Jimmy.
Yeah.
This is Jimmy Leslie, by the way.
Hey, everybody.
Jimmy's our guest today. He is the resident artist of Coal Art.
Yes.
And he is also the director of the Fine Art Collective. I blanked there for a minute.
That's okay, our education program, yeah.
But if you watched last year, you came on with the CAD-free colors from Liquitex. So it's been actually 40 episodes since last time.
Okay.
So it's ironic that it kind of split right there.
I'm just happy I got invited back.
I know.
It's like if you don't get invited to a party a second time, you're like, what did I do wrong?
so we've got Celia Buchanan from Marabou. She, I think, must have found out that I was saying that somebody needed to be the Alec Baldwin of the show and keep coming back to help host episodes. So she kind of took that seriously, and I think she's been back for 3 now.
Yes.
But you'll catch up by the end of this year.
Yes. Okay, good.
But Jimmy's going to be talking about drying oils and mediums with us here in a moment. I'm going to, just at the beginning here, so people that are catching this now or watching the replay later, we'll see next week we're actually going to be filming from in the field. We will not be here live. We'll do a very quick live pop-up down at the retail store. Will Campbell and I will. Will's back behind the camera. He's being shy today and didn't want to come out. But Will and I will be going to do Art of the Carolinas all... not next week, but the week after, Will. Because next week we're going to have that pre-filmed airbrush episode. Because I will be out of town at an artist retreat finally for once.
Good for you.
I know. So, but the week after that, Will and I will be popping up live all week long, starting that Tuesday. Wednesday, we'll be going all the way probably through Sunday. So, and I think they'll even pop in at Art of the Carolinas in one of my painting workshops to kind of see.
I've been there before. It's a crazy busy event.
It's crazy busy, fun, lots of rock bottom crazy prices on products.
Yeah.
Over 150 workshops.
Wow.
In 3-4 days.
Awesome.
So I mean it's lots of cool stuff going on. So Will and I will be documenting that live. So if you are a YouTube watcher and you haven't subscribed to our channel, make sure that you subscribe, because then anytime we go live, that will pop up with an alert that we are live, so you can catch the actual live broadcast if you want. Facebook, Katie, they just have to, what do they do, like the page? And they will, and do they get an alert then? Is there,
what? Yeah, you can click on the little bell.
A bell,
that'll
okay.
tell you to be notified when we go live.
Okay.
It lets you choose now. If you like our page, it used to just be if you
okay.
like our page. Now
all right, so it doesn't, it takes more than a like now. You actually have to ring the bell. to get the live, to get the live notifications. So do that if you want to watch, see those pop up on Facebook live, then you'll know and you'll be there with us. So so that will be in 2 Tuesdays from now.
Cool.
So so we've got a lot of really awesome stuff to cover. Nobody, I think, could present this better and would just make sense of. This is very confusing to people.
It is, yeah. Oil painting is confusing. I think any of you out there who have worked with watercolor, I mean, that's something we all work with as a little kid. You get a little set in kindergarten, first grade or whatever. You've got your brush, your pans, and easy cleanup.
Right.
It's not the easiest medium we find later on when we're adults and we really try to do some beautiful things with watercolor.
Right, yes.
But you don't have disastrous results for the most part in terms of it technically working.
Exactly.
You might have disastrous results in the image you get with watercolor if you're, before you're trained. And then I think acrylics, they want to stick to almost any surface. I feel like you almost have to work to mess up acrylics.
You just have to really thin them down with water, I think. When you're, and we've talked about that on the shows multiple times, but I think people can see when that starts coming apart.
Yes.
Kind of where it just isn't as cohesive and it starts getting a little bubbly and too thin. And I think there's kind of that line that you can see happening with acrylics where you're kind of like, whoa, I need to dial it back and not thin.
Yeah.
But oils,
Yeah, so let's do this, Amy. I think for all of you out there, to me, the most important thing in educating somebody is to not assume anything.
Yes.
So I'm not going to assume that you have any knowledge here with oils, and let's just, for a brief moment, step back and say, okay, what are we talking about when we talk about oil paint? What is it? So we've got a binder. Think of that as your glue, your thing that sticks the painting down. So I've got a few things that are not oil here to just kind of help us illustrate
think that's helpful.
So we've got WInsor Newton gloss gel. Gloss gel, it's an acrylic polymer. This would be our binder in acrylic paint.
Right.
It could be a matte version.
Right.
It could be, instead of a gel, it could be fluid. It could be any variety of it, but it's an acrylic polymer. So that, if I put that out, it's very, let's see, Amy, it's almost like slime when you were a kid. If I date myself a little bit there, do you remember that gooey stuff?
It's like slightly wetter than, remember, paste in a jar with that?
Yeah.
That's what it reminds me of.
So that's a gel consistency. If we took that, and here we've got our we've got ultramarine blue pigment, right? Beautiful pigment, which actually comes from a piece of lapis. Isn't that a gorgeous stone?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, really, really pretty stone. So if we took that, and we'll take a little bit of this pigment, and I'm going to wipe off my palette knife, and I'm going to take just a little bit of that in here, and if we began to mix that together, we wouldn't really have paint right away. It would help to use a muller, right? A glass muller that's got a ground surface to it and a grinding slab, because you can see how gritty that is right there.
Right.
But rudimentary speaking, though, right? We're getting paint.
You're making a very rough version of paint.
A
Yes,
very
ladies.
rough version of paint.
Oh, we got to pull it forward just
let's
a
pull
bit.
it forward. Make sure everybody can see things out there.
There we go.
So we could do that, and that pigment acts as our colorant, which comes from that stone, and we use an acrylic polymer as a binder, and that's going to glue that to the surface.
Right.
If we had gum arabic, which is our binder in watercolor, kind of looks almost like amber.
It does, very
right?
much
Really,
so.
really pretty. It is a resin.
Here's things
Wanna
on
put
the
it
white.
here?
It might be easier
Yeah,
to
there
see.
we go. It's a resin from an acacia tree, and it acts as a glue. And actually, Amy, if I have, I'm gonna reach over and I'm gonna take my tea for a second that I have over here, because I don't have water. We're not doing a water-based episode, but I'm gonna use the water from the tea right there and just stick that on here to the gum arabic, and you can just see how much of a binder that is.
Wow.
Right, so that, along with that same colorant, that same pigment that we had before, would act as the binder for watercolor. And you would see it here, gum arabic in its fluid form right here. Okay, so now when we get to, and you can actually see, I have to be careful
And
because I
Jimmy's
could.
going to have this stuck to his hand.
Well,
for us.
I
Yeah,
could
but-
shake to a point where all of a sudden it flies off and hits
Right.
somebody, and I don't want to do that. But very carefully, it can come off, and that acts as our binder. So when we're talking about oil paint, we're generally speaking, and we're talking about linseed oil.
Right.
Could be other drying oils as well, and we'll get into that a little bit. But that's going to be the vehicle, the thing that moves our paint. It's going to be the thing that also glues our paint to its surface. So the best way to start this episode, really, and I would venture to say almost, I don't want to say the most important thing, but almost one of the most important things you can keep in mind right now. This is an example of what happens with oil paint if it is thinned too much with solvent. So I have a tremendous amount of solvent, and what it's done here is it's made the paint separate.
Right.
Looks very dull.
Yep.
Right? We generally think of oil paint as being quite glossy. This looks very dull. You can see cracking in here.
Yep.
You can see sort of little rivulets where what's happened here, and actually the best way to illustrate this, I'm going to take this paper towel. Look what happens. If I do that.
We actually did this with one of my college pieces that had been spray varnished
Oh.
to prove the point of that not every, just because you teach doesn't mean necessarily that you're using the proper protocol, right?
Absolutely.
And actually took one of my paintings, because my professor would mineral spirits the
Yes.
heck out of everything.
Yes.
And I went,
Yeah.
rubbed out part of the painting.
Yeah, so you can see that right there. There's color coming off there, absolutely what you don't want to do. And I say that this is super, super important because often, I was a college professor for many years, And one of the things I would see students do is they would thin their paint down
Yes.
so much to begin a painting.
Yes.
So do not thin your oil paint to the consistency of watercolor.
Right.
All right, big thing there. We're going to get to the ratios you do want to use with solvent and
Right.
oil shortly, but let's look at the opposite. So this is stand oil. Stand oil is a linseed oil. We'll get to specifically what that means shortly, because we're going to look at a whole lineup of drying oils and what they mean and what their characteristics are. But this is, in this case, only solvent.
Right.
In this case, only oil.
Right.
And a lot of it. And now you see the opposite. Instead of the paint spreading apart in the first example and being very dull, beautiful gloss to it.
Right.
Wonderful. But it's risen up off the surface. And Amy, if you feel that,
Oh yeah, you can just see
Tacky.
that it's. Oh my.
yeah, that's still
Oh,
tacky.
you can't.
That-
you
that-
guys can't hear it with the thing, but it
Yeah.
goes.
Yeah, that almost.
Yeah.
A little of that on there, but that almost sticks. That
Yeah.
that sticks to my hand.
Yeah.
This I did this example probably 6 weeks ago.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
So it's staying perpetually tacky, and what's happening is that paint is now, instead of coming apart, it's coming up off the surface.
Right.
That means wherever it's sticking up like that, it's not touching the surface, so it's not being held down really there either. So either one of these would not be a great foundation for
Right.
a painting at all. So, and let's take a look also here, just two examples of the drying oils that we're gonna look at later on. Actually, here I want to look at these. Safflower, right? So safflower seeds, very, very pale. Put a few of these out right here, right? That's going to give us a very, very pale oil. Flaxseed, which is what linseed comes from, and flaxseed you might have in a high fiber diet as well. Right, flax meal. That's darker, which gives us the more yellow linseed oil. We're going to take a look at that. So let's do that all together. Amy, if you could kind of move that out of the way.
Sure.
I'm going to move this.
It's right back here.
Yep. And what we're going to do.
Are we going to need this again?
No,
Okay.
Amy,
I'm
that's
just gonna put it right
good
over
at the
here for
moment.
now.
What we're going to do right now is we're going to move this board over, Amy, and we're going to give everybody a look at 7 different drying oils here. Now, cold pressed linseed oil. This is pretty standard. A lot of times what you'll see in oil paint, you'll look at the back of a tube and you'll see this says linseed oil right on here. So that's usually cold pressed linseed oil.
Right.
Oftentimes we make oil paint with cold pressed linseed oil because it really wets the pigments very, very well. And you want to have all your pigments wet, all coated, because imagine if you were trying to glue something down,
Right.
and the glue wasn't all over that thing
Right.
you were trying to glue down, it wouldn't really hold it well. So cold pressed linseed oil really wets pigment very, very well. So we're going to kind of start with that. We're just going to pour a little bit of it out at the top right here. Pretty fluid. Almost looks like olive oil.
Very much so.
Right, very much so.
Like the virgin oil,
Yep,
cold pressed.
Yep, very
olive
much
oil.
so. Sort of has that consistency. We're going to see that consistency a little bit more in a minute. So that's sort of middle of the road. If you look at fastest to slowest drying rates of oil paint, we could generally say that earth colors, things like burnt sienna, yellow ochre, umber, all those earth colors tend to dry the quickest of your oil paints
Now,
out of the tube.
this is due to the pigment, actually, correct?
Yes.
The grind of the pigment
Yeah,
with those.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Because a few things happen. Different pigments need a different amounts of oil
Right.
to have that paint,
Right.
the consistency that you want an oil paint to have. So you don't need as much oil in here compared to the ratio of pigment to get paint. So they'll tend to dry faster. And when we look at oil paint, drying rate overall, we're talking about 2 days to 14 days dry to the touch.
Right.
Now, when we get into
And,
varnishing,
and that's without any mediums or anything. That's just if you're painting a relatively
I take this.
normal swatch of. Okay.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point because I'll put stuff like cadmiums, cobalts here in the middle. So around 2 days or so for earth colors. Around 5 days or so, cadmiums, cobalts. If we take colors like alizarin, quinacridones, phthalo blues, tend to be 7 days or longer.
Which this is why people are always like, why do they use burnt umber or burnt sienna to prime to put a ground on your canvas?
Sure.
That's because it dries
Yeah,
quickly.
yeah, you tend to use that. Maybe terra vert
Right,
would be
yes.
another color, beautiful green earth color. And the thing about this, here's what I would suggest to all of you. because I can't go into all 119
Yeah.
WInsor Newton colors right now and talk about each drying rate.
We'd make Katie crazy.
That would be boring. What I would suggest you do is whatever your palette is at home, you're probably using 9, 10, 12 colors is about average what people might use in a palette. My suggestion to you is tomorrow, next time in your studio, don't make it a big, a big to-do about it. Just as you're prepping everything and putting out your paints, put out a little swatch. I would do a thin swatch. I would do a thick swatch of each color on a canvas board or on a canvas. Make a note, what's the temperature in your studio? Because all of this has to do with your atmosphere in your studio, how thick or thin you put the color down. So if you put a little thick and thin swatch, make a note of the temperature. If you can make note of relative humidity, but honestly, it doesn't really matter. It's your studio.
Well, and for them to do this, would it be good? What I would probably be tempted to do is do it on a surface that I typically tend to use. Because if I never use panels, but I use canvas, canvas dries quicker usually than panels because you've got some air exchange.
Yeah, that's a great point. Great point. Likewise, if you were to use a masonite panel that's got a very absorbent ground, that might dry way faster. So really good point, Amy. Use a surface that you're generally using, or if there is two, do a sample on each, and then just do a touch test the next few days and make notes about it. Oh, okay. Dry to the touch in 2 days. Great. Still a little tacky, day 3. And so on and so on. And you'll have a good idea of what's going on out of the tube with the colors you're using.
Brilliant idea.
So you have a good starting point, right? So cold pressed linseed oil, right, is roughly our starting point right there. Then we've got over here to the left side, we've got oils that are going to dry quicker. So let's go all the way over here to drying linseed oil. I'm going to put some of this out. Drying linseed oil is going to increase gloss. It's fluid, not quite as fluid as this, but you're going to notice
it's spread much slower.
Yeah, a little bit more yellow, right? So that's going to increase our drying rate. We've got thickened linseed oil, and let's take a look at what this looks like when we.
Here so they can see
good point. Thank you, Amy.
No, that's fine.
And then we're gonna watch when we pour this out. Thickened linseed oil.
It's like honey.
It's like honey. Yeah.
Wow.
It's actually, it's a good point that you say it's like honey, but hold that thought because it's actually a little bit more syrup-like when we get to the thing that looks more honey-like. So a little bit more syrup.
Oh yeah, I know what you're gonna.
Yeah, you probably know where I'm going.
Oh yeah.
So thickened linseed oil has been thickened. A lot of times you might see an oil called blown oil. Usually heat is blown through there, right? Because oil needs oxygen to dry.
Right.
So we're already getting it to dry, and that's thickening it up a little bit.
Right.
Drying poppy oil. So poppy is different than linseed, right? It's a different seed. And you can use walnut oil as well. Some companies will use that. If you've ever smelled that when it goes rancid, though, it's it's pretty off-putting.
If it's been around for a while.
Not great. So let's look at drying poppy oil. And this is very fluid.
Yes, it is.
And much more pale. And what you'll see with drying poppy oil, or what I want to point out about that, is it is slower drying than cold pressed linseed oil, but this has dryers added to it.
Okay.
Okay, there's dryers added to it.
Can I smell it while we're doing this?
Yeah,
I'm curious to
sure.
see
Smell it if
you know me. I smell everything. I'm
let's
just
look
curious
at-
to
I
see.
feel like we need to preface this with don't smell your art
No. It's just Amy. Amy can tell.
You
Like
need to have,
I
a
like to
lesson.
guess what things are in things. Just
You're not supposed to smell directly. You're supposed to waft. You go back to ninth grade.
this isn't a meal. This is oil.
It's
You
not.
can't really.
It's not very strong.
No,
No,
and
it's
that's.
not
I
very
just
strong.
wanted to see because there's some things like there's an underpainting white that you can open and about knocks you over.
So let's take a look at
From,
refined
someone else.
linseed oil now. Very pale, very, very fluid. And so what happens, it's alkali refined, so it removes some of the acidic nature of the oil, makes it more pale, and it slows down the drying rate. So we're going fastest to slowest drying.
I did not realize
Yep,
that
fastest to
processing
slowest
it that
now.
way would. Interesting.
Now you mentioned, I believe you mentioned honey before, and I said hold that thought
Yep,
when we were talking thickened linseed oil, but now look at
I knew where you were going. With
linseed stand oil. It takes a little bit. Yeah, now that's
definitely.
right, and you can see how that piles up. Makes it very, very glossy, very slow drying. Linseed stand oil is linseed oil, It's been heated to over 500 degrees for several hours, and it makes it a much more viscous.
Almost like polymerizes
Yes,
it.
absolutely,
Okay.
but it's a very slow drying oil, very, very high gloss. And again,
Right.
you notice it. This is what I used on this, so that's
Right.
how high gloss that became. You probably get a glare, all you guys looking at it out there. And then finally, safflower oil, very, very pale, right? Safflower seeds, and this one is very, very thin and very pale as well. So now let's take a look. Amy, what we're going to do is we're going to slowly kind of slide this around and give
This is the
everybody a
exciting
look.
part.
Yeah, so here's the thing, guys. What we're showing you right now, coloring, showing you viscosity, which we're going to see because we're going to tilt
Yeah.
this and get it to slide a little bit more, and also drying rates. So if we're talking about drying oils, and we're talking about creating a medium, that is a drying oil that has some solvent
Right.
to it that we're going to use to paint
Right.
and change our viscosity of our tubes of paint, then we have to ask ourselves certain questions. What are you trying to do?
Right.
Right? So if your main goal, Amy, is, well, I want it to dry very, very fast, don't choose that.
No, God, no.
Right? Go over to this side of the spectrum.
Right.
But then also within that, what does the paint feel like and how does it move?
Right.
So then let's tilt this over here.
This is going to be the best.
Right? So this is kind of like I'd say this is sort of like a drying oil horse race. It's like
Yeah.
who's going to win, right? I grew up around the corner from a racetrack and I could always hear them calling. And it was like, and they're off. And
Oh, wow.
Amy call it refined linseed
Yeah,
oil's
yeah.
in the lead.
I don't know, that safflower
Drying.
oil's speeding up.
It is speeding up. I'm
kinda
tilting
going
a
off
little
the track,
bit.
though.
Look at stand oil.
Yeah, it's not.
Stand
And
oil
the
is-
sun thickened is just.
Stand oil is
barely
standing.
Stand oil
Yeah.
is a dog.
Yeah.
If this was a horse race, forget it. Stand oil's winning nothing.
Yeah, your
Thickened
safflower
linseed
oil's done.
Safflower oil won it right there. Obviously, how much you put out too. We weren't
Right,
scientific
right.
about
Yeah,
how
but
much
it's,
we put
but
out.
it's still. It's,
But you get
these
an
two are
idea.
extremely
Yeah,
similar.
and really when you thin it out like that too, notice just how clear poppy oil looks. Again, not as clear as refined linseed oil, not as clear as safflower oil here as well. So once again, we've got to ask ourselves questions. What are we trying to do with our painting process? Do we want to be, so safflower oil, if you really want to be slow drying because you like to make a lot of changes, a lot of blending over
Right.
time, maybe
Doing
you,
like glazing or things where you need to be able to keep working kind of wet and wet.
Absolutely,
Okay.
then wonderful, right? But maybe you don't want it to be that slick and fluid. Maybe you like a thicker application. So for those of you out here who are newer to oil painting, when we pull a, let's actually take some paint, Amy, and we'll put
Here,
a little
I'm
bit
gonna
of.
turn this around.
Yeah, go
so
ahead, turn
they've
that
got
around.
they can see which is which here.
Yep. Actually, I'm going to use, not that it matters, but I'm going to use some cobalt blue deep right here. So let's just take a look at putting this down, cobalt blue deep. Okay,
Sorry.
really pretty color.
I have to make that noise when it's going.
What was that noise again?
Yeah.
Okay, so drag, what we
Yeah.
call how our paint pulls across the surface. Can you hear that rough surface? Paint, very thick, very viscous, right out of the tube. Right? That's sort
Yeah,
of
it's
our
very
drag,
dry.
right? It starts to not be, it grabs. It's dragging and grabbing on there. Let's put that same amount out over here now. And let's take refined linseed oil. And what happens when we put it in here?
Oh yeah.
That changes the whole thing. Makes it much more fluid. It makes it more transparent,
Right.
right? Because I'm thinning it down. It's going to add gloss to it as well, but it's going to change the way that feels. And then let's take a look at linseed stand oil over here. Right, totally different. Wipe that off. Again, similar drag, but we take this now, and right, you can see
Yeah,
that
it's-
syrupy nature.
Yeah, it's got kind of the strings.
Look at even here just how much more glossy that is, but it's
Oh,
still
yeah.
got a lot of drag. It's going to thin it out to a degree, but it's still got a lot of drag. But what we don't have right here, Amy, is we don't have a medium just yet.
Right.
We're talking about drying
Right.
oils.
And that confuses a lot of people.
Okay, so-
they'll contact me and be like, "Well, what oil do I use? What mediums are you using?" And then they're
Yeah.
Like, what?
So here's the deal. Let's take a look again at linseed stand oil. Where did that go, Amy? Right here. So we've got linseed stand oil, just out of the container, just like we had right here. This is linseed stand oil, Amy, that has 5 parts solvent to 1 part oil. You can see just how much more fluid that is.
It's even more fluid than
Absolutely.
the safflower oil or the cold pressed linseed.
Absolutely. This has 1 part stand oil to 1 part solvent. So if you look at those, this is definitely still viscous.
Right.
Nowhere near as much as this, but it's not as fluid as this.
Right.
So here's the deal. We talk about fat over lean when we talk about oil painting. What does fat over lean mean?
Right.
I like to think of a house building analogy. All right. So if you start with the foundation of your house, what do you usually build as a foundation? Usually stonework.
Stone,
right?
brick, something firm.
Yeah. The cinder blocks, stuff like that, right? It's a very solid. It's a very rigid form. And then if you build with wood on top of that, the wood flexes. Think about if we switched that. Now, if we put wood below and it flexed, and then we had concrete up top, we would have the concrete breaking. It would start to crack over time. So the same thing happens when we paint and we think of the rule of fat over lean. We're talking about fat, more oil over less oil content in our layers. Or we could think about that as thick over thin.
Yes.
And we could think about that as slow drying over fast drying.
Yes.
So here's the deal with that. If we are painting, and I use just stand oil like that as my first layer.
Right.
Number one, it's quite thick.
Yes.
It's very slow drying.
Yes.
I have that, and so think of this. This is my layer of just this thick stand oil. Slow drying, very fatty, and I put a very thin layer of something on top of that that's going to dry much quicker.
Right.
So this is dry up top, and while this is still flexing and moving and trying to dry, this up here starts to crack.
Right.
We don't want that to happen.
No, we do not.
So every time you guys out there are painting with oil paint, you've got to ask yourself, am I putting down something? So let's just talk tubes for a minute.
Right.
We talked about alizarin crimson being very oily, very slow drying.
Katie, can you pop it up to see the Jimmy?
So if we do that, if we were just a paint with just out of the tube, no medium, no drying oil, no nothing, and we used alizarin crimson, that's slow drying.
Right.
7 days or more.
Right.
Then we go and we put a layer of yellow ochre on top of that. Very fast drying.
Earth tones.
Right. So what's going to happen? This is going to be taking all this time to dry because it's very slow, it's very oily, and now we put something leaner on top. And if we put a thin layer on top, it's even going to dry faster.
Right.
And that means this thing on top is going to crack because what's underneath is flexing over time. I like to think of a balloon that has like plaster of Paris on it. That balloon's very flexible.
Right.
Plaster of Paris dries real fast, let out a little air, and that's going to crack on top. So you want to make sure that does not happen. But when we talk about a medium, that's what these are. When I've added solvent to my drying oils, I create a medium. And a medium is going to alter viscosity. It's going to possibly change the sheen, and it's going to change the drying time.
Right.
But what it's going to do is let down my paint because for the most part, probably, using your paint out of the tube like that, think about trying to cover this whole canvas, Amy, if it's that thick.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to really do that.
Well, not only would it take forever, I mean, you could.
Yeah, you could.
But
absolutely.
you would also be wasting a lot more paint.
You'd use a
That's
tremendous amount
one of the
paint.
things that people don't understand with mediums. They'll say, I go through so much paint. If you use mediums and you employ that to help make your painting experience easier, chemically, where it's going to be structurally more sound, you're using way less paint.
Right,
absolutely. Ridiculous amounts less paint than if you were just painting straight from the tube.
For sure. So again, let's review here real quick. If I have all these 7 things out here, how do you make a choice between them? Again, fastest to slowest drying. So what are you trying to do in the studio?
Right.
If you're, let's say you're a painting student, you've got 15 weeks to make paintings. You probably don't want to use stand oil, linseed, or refine. You probably don't want to be in this range because you've got little time to paint. Right. If you are painting on the go, you're traveling somewhere, you probably don't want to
Yeah,
have this.
you're going to be carrying
right?
wet stuff around for the rest of your trip.
Yeah, if you're around somewhere for, let's say, 2 weeks
Mhm.
out painting on it, you're going to be on this retreat. I know you're going to be doing pastels, I think you said.
Yeah.
But if you were oil painting and you were gone for a week or two,
Oh, yeah.
this is still going to be wet at the end of this
Oh, yeah,
week.
definitely.
We're over here, you're going to be set up a bit and not have as much of an issue. And then the second thing, once you've determined your drying rate of the oil, then your other thing to determine is, how do you like to paint? Do you like a thicker feel?
Right.
Do you like a thinner feel? And again, how much solvent you put in there to a degree is going to change that. Now, if you're just painting all in, alla prima is what we call all in one
Right.
go. You're just going out to paint for the day. So if Amy, you and I are going out to paint for 2-3 hours, we're doing one layer, doesn't matter.
Right.
We're talking fat over lean is really something that is important if you're working in
Right.
layers, right?
Right.
So this having 5 parts solvent, roughly, to 1 part of your drying oil is a good all-around lean mixture.
Right.
We could use that, and that's going to be, as you can see in here, quite runny.
Right.
And if we wanted to do a 1-session painting, no problem.
Right.
No problem. 1-to-1 ratio. You like to paint a little bit thicker. You like a little bit more drag. You don't want it to be as runny as this. One painting session, no problem. Just go ahead and use that. But if it's going to be 2 sessions, here's where things get messed up. You want this one leaner,
Right.
right? Less oily, right? So it's lean,
Right.
more oily,
Right.
fat over lean.
Right.
This one, because it has more oil, slower drying. This one, faster drying, right? So we're maintaining that.
Right.
Thick over thin, right? So slow over fast, thick over thin, more oily over less oily.
Right.
Those are your 3 ways to think about the fat over lean rule. And if you're writing that down now, great. Re-look at the episode.
Yeah, yeah.
and check that out. But those are your 3 ways to go about looking at the drying oils. The other thing that's important that we haven't mentioned is, what are you painting with? What colors, rather?
Right.
So let's say, Amy, your palette is, or anybody out there, your palette is very, very light in tone. It's a lot of whites. It's possibly a lot of pale blues.
Right.
Don't use this.
Right.
If you use the thickened linseed oil with as yellow as that is, you're going to take on that yellowish tinge if you're mostly using whites. If you're using pale blues, it wouldn't affect the cobalt blue deep here so much, but if you were using a paler blue, maybe a cerulean blue, you might get a greenish tint to that. So that's why a lot of times what you see in, and I'm going to steal one of our whites here.
I've noticed that about WInsor Newton. That there'll be safflower oil in some, or different.
Right. So you see safflower oil. This is flake white hue. So it's safflower oil. And it's safflower oil because it will not affect.
Right. Because that was, I mean, after that poured off with this, can you show the split screen for us, Katie?
It's there.
Oh, okay. Oh, it's so tiny. I didn't see it there. Sorry, Katie.
Picture in picture.
Yeah. It blends in with the table on our screen. This, you almost can't even see that this is here because it's so white. It's so clear. It just blends in with that.
Right. You actually
So that makes sense with the white.
Yeah. And before we even go ahead, let's put a few more swatches down so we can just see the difference between these. And once again, Amy, we're doing this just to illustrate here the change in viscosity from each one.
Right.
But we wouldn't want to just go full tilt oil here. Right. If you were in your last stage of a painting, let's say 3, 4, 5, 6 layers or more, you were in your very last stage and you're doing some glazing, you could just go with some oil.
Right.
Again, why? Because it's going to be very fatty.
Right.
Right. Linseed stand oil is very self-leveling. It's wonderful for glazes. It gives a beautiful high gloss to it. But let's take a look at safflower oil. Look how very runny that is. Right? So we talked about, in the beginning here, we talked about a lot of times what you see students do is they thin out their paint a whole lot.
Right.
This is where, even in the earliest stage, that's where I would go with something that's, regardless of which drying oil you're using, I'd go with something that is, again, about 5 parts solvent to 1 part oil. That way, it's still got binder in there, right? So this would still have 1 part binder.
Right.
And we wouldn't have the issue of that color coming off.
Right,
And that's what you
exactly.
don't want to have. I feel like you work hard, you make this painting, you're learning, you get it to where it wants to, you want it to be aesthetically, and then down the road you find out
Yeah.
that it's fallen apart. And I had that with stand oil in early graduate school paintings. They actually ended up sticking together.
Oh no.
Yeah, they stuck together. They were perpetually tacky
I've
like
had
this.
some that I had to do just a demo for something here, and it was a water mixable brand, and the stand oil, literally 2 years later, you could still put a fingerprint in it.
Yeah, that'll happen.
From having to use it to show the glazing, but it was just like, oh.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that happens, if you flip your fat over lean rule and you have lean over fat, faster drying over slower drying, you seal off that slower drying layer below from getting the oxygen it needs to dry. Because remember, it's not watercolor, it's not acrylic. You're not, in those cases, you're drying by evaporation.
Right.
Water evaporates off. The gum arabic holds that color in place. The acrylic polymers link together in an acrylic painting and hold everything into place. But here we need oxygen for that to happen.
And stand oil becomes very enamel-like.
It does. It becomes very, very enamel-like. And it's even good that you say that, enamel. People think that an enamel is really a descriptor for something that has a very hard, shiny surface.
Right.
A lot of times people think that enamel is like something different than watercolor, acrylic, oil, enamel.
Right.
No, you can have an enamel-like finish with acrylics.
Right.
You can have an enamel-like finish with oils. Let's take a little drying poppy oil here. Again, very slick. We're getting that same sort of slick feeling. So this is where, if I looked and said, well, I like that slick feeling. I like that. Okay, but I want it to dry slower, then that's my choice.
Right.
I want it to dry faster, that's my choice.
Right. Now, if this wasn't a drying poppy oil, this would be over here with the safflower oil.
Exactly.
Though.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes. Correct.
And actually, it's a little slower drying, I believe.
Yeah,
than
correct.
Safflower. Okay.
Correct. And again, it's drying poppy oil because dryers have been added to it to be able to do that. So that's why you can have this very pale oil, very slick oil, but we put it over on the faster drying side, and then thickened linseed oil.
That's an awesome way to do it, because otherwise it can introduce a host of problems.
Yes. And again, thickened linseed oil has very much that same sort of feel as stand oil does, very glossy like that, but again, over on the thicker spectrum, and also color differences depending on my palette.
Because that's been given time to start to set up.
Absolutely.
Which is why it's thicker.
Yeah.
And also why it's a little bit more yellow.
Yeah, it's taken on more oxygen already. It's already moving.
It's on the move to drying.
It's on the move to drying. Yes.
Starting it.
Yeah. And then very, very fluid with the linseed, the drying linseed oil as well, but going to be our fastest.
Yeah, that's
so,
nice.
So think about this, Amy. We went back before and we said, hey, if you're in your studio and you've got your paint out of the tube, thin swatch, thick swatch, do a little dry test. So that you generally have an idea of what your oils dry like, depending on what colors you're using. Then, if you make a choice of one of your drying oils based on drying rates, based on thickness, thinness of viscosity, thicker viscosity, thinner viscosity, and color, then I would do the same test with that.
Yeah.
And do it with, like I said, like a 5-part solvent to 1 part oil mixture. Because again, it's a general good lean mixture. And if you're not doing anything in layers, or that's just going to be your starting point where you wanna sketch out gesturally your painting.
Right.
Good way to lean it out. Good way to keep that going. And I should mention, we're using Sansador. Sansador is a WInsor Newton solvent. Sansador as in sans odor. So it's a low odor. It's a low odor mineral spirits essentially.
Right.
The thing about solvents that to me is important. When I was in graduate school, I used turpentine.
Yes.
Yeah, and I would wash my hands with turpentine and then wonder why my skin got so dry. Now I wouldn't wash my hands with this either.
No, yeah, but that's
But what happens is you want to think about how caustic that is to your skin.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Not only that, you want to think about your flash point of a solvent that you're using. So if we use a solvent that everyone knows about, something very volatile, gasoline. Right? Gasoline's like -45 degrees Fahrenheit.
Right.
And a flash point is when the vapors, right? The vapors that come from that solvent, from that volatile material, if they come in contact with a spark.
Right.
Right? That's why you're not supposed to have gasoline in the trunk of your car.
Right.
Right?
Right.
If you look at turpentine is around, I think it's about 50 degrees or so.
Wow.
Is your, actually, no, a little bit higher, sorry, Amy, about 91
Yeah,
Fahrenheit.
I want to say it seems like it was
91 Fahrenheit.
From having a studio that didn't have climate control for a
there
while.
you go, yeah.
I had to be very aware
very
of
cautious
that,
of that, yeah.
because it was like, that could.
Yeah, and so regardless of any material that you're using as a solvent, you've got rags and stuff, put it in a metal container.
Yep.
Right, put it in a metal container.
Mm-hmm.
But again, turpentine about 91.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got mineral spirits about 101, sand stores 150.
That's awesome.
So if we're at 150 degrees, we've got bigger problems than our, than our solvent. We're in a
I
crazy,
don't think
crazy
that's
climate.
your first problem.
Yeah, your first problem is get out of 150 degree temperatures. Don't be there. That's not great for you. But just a little note on solvents, very important. So let's say, Amy, that drying is super important to us. Fast drying is super important to us. Let's skip any of these then.
Okay.
Let's get rid of them. That was your cue. Get rid of them.
Oh.
That's your
I'm sorry. I'm transfixed, like looking at the. Yes. Okay.
I'm gonna move this
Looking at
over
the blue.
here. And what we're going to do, Amy, we're going to transition and we're going to take a look at alkyds.
All right.
So what is an alkyd, Amy? What is an alkyd? So alkyds go back quite a ways. Around 1901, alkyds are invented by General Electric. Yes. They were used as insulators.
Oh,
right?
okay.
It's not until about the 1930s that alkyds are used in architectural coatings. And then somebody like Picasso found use in them through architectural coatings and house paints and things like that. And then it was in 1967, when WInsor Newton came out with its liquid, first liquid original. It wasn't called original.
Right.
Because
there
wasn't any other one.
It.
It was just liquid. So what is an alkyd? Okay, an alkyd is an oil that has been modified with alcohol. So alkyd, that first part.
Right.
And acid, alkyd. Alcohol and acid, it's been modified. Generally speaking, with art materials, you use soy oil. It yellows less than linseed oil, than like a cold pressed linseed oil. So that modification with alcohol and acid means it's going to speed up your drying rate by 50%. So if you guys are out there, and again, I have a former colleague of mine from my teaching days. He likes to use alkyds in his class with his students because they're under the gun in 15 weeks to make several paintings, and they don't have the time for safflower oil to slow down that drying rate. So with these, we've got 5 varieties, and we'll pour out a little bit. They do the same kind of thing. They're all gonna speed up the drying rate by 50%. So if your colors are drying, again, you've got that little test you did, your homework, your little test.
They like it when we give them homework.
And but here's the thing. I want to talk about color mixing in a little bit too. I say homework and joke around about that. Don't make it that.
Well, okay, but just like homework.
Yeah.
It is as important as the work that you do, because if you're taking the time to look at the different mediums that you've got, look at your paints, look at your colors, you're finding ways that are going to help you be a better painter.
Yeah.
Faster, especially if you do a lot of commission work.
Yeah.
You're under the gun. You can shoot yourself in the foot really easy by not taking the time. The little bit of time this is going to take is time and money well spent.
Absolutely, it's well spent. And
time is money.
But I say it doesn't have to be work, because like I go into my studio, and okay, you're an artist who maybe you're a natural procrastinator. Number one, maybe you go into your studio, people are raising their hands off set.
They're all like,
all waving. So maybe you're a natural procrastinator. Maybe you're just having a crappy day. Maybe you're going to your studio, there's more hands being raised. Maybe
it has nothing to do with you.
I'm getting on a flight home tomorrow, so even if it does,
you're like, yeah.
The other thing that could happen, you're in your studio, you're working on something, and you're at a roadblock.
Right.
Right,
Right,
you're
right.
just, I'm just not into it today. So that's
Ta-da!
that's when I would take the time. Like sometimes I draw my sketchbook, but other times I'll perform little tests. So I might mess around and just perform little color studies. In this case, you can try different mediums, different drying oils, different alkyds, make little swatches, make notes, and it will serve you well. If I could step back from all the daily responsibilities in my job and mentally step away from my work and
Right.
just spend 3 months color mixing like I did in college when I thought it was a horrible chore.
Yes, yes.
I mean,
Isn't it?
I
Yeah.
would love to do that because that's
Yeah.
how you learn. So Liquid Original is make sure my palette knife is clean. Liquid Original, kind of thick, right? But not gel. Actually, I'll let you feel that, Amy. Not gel-like though, right? It'll sit up a little bit.
Now, is this thixotropic where it's gonna flatten out when it feels like it is?
Amy, you
Sorry.
scientist, you thixotropic.
I don't. Okay, so I don't use
Hold that
I don't
thought.
use alkyds. So
Hold that
I'm
thought.
asking because I'm curious.
It's a good question. Amy,
Okay.
Amy just laid a big word on
Sorry.
you, thixotropic. That's like
I've
triple
tried
word
I've
score
tried to beat it in the
on
before.
Scrabble.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, hold the thixotropic thought, and we'll get back to that term. This one's liquid fine detail. So you could imagine if you wanted to do things that had fine detail, you'd probably want it to be able to be much more fluid.
Yes. Very
So,
fluid and controlled.
Let me be careful about pouring that out.
Oh my.
Right?
It's like the safflower oil
Yeah.
thickness.
It's like the
really.
safflower oil thickness, kind of like the poppy oil almost in color,
Yeah.
right? So let's
Very light.
we have that one. Let's look at liquid light gel. Liquid light gel is more what we call thixotropic.
Okay. Yeah.
I feel like there should
Oh,
be
I
a
can see
game
it.
show where it's like ding ding
Sorry.
ding ding ding. A word of the day is
I'd be like,
thixotropic.
ooh, pick me.
Which on Pee-wee's Playhouse you say?
Yeah.
Yes. So
Yeah.
there you go.
Scream it loud.
Thixotropic.
Yes. There we go.
Thixator.
I don't know. That's.
O-P-I-C.
I have to write it out.
Thixotropic.
I can't. I have to
I
write
believe
it out.
I just
and then
won the
know
spelling bee. I
You
think
did.
somebody's probably
No,
looking it
no,
up right
yeah.
now and it's
Oh,
wrong.
not an A.
Oh. Okay, I lost the
Freeze
spelling
got
bee.
spell check.
All right.
I googled it.
I don't like Google. Thixotropic. What does that mean, everybody? The one thing that I like to think about when I use that term thixotropic, sort of like toothpaste.
Yes.
Toothpaste, right? Very gel-like. You put it on your toothbrush, but obviously you brush, it gets mixed in your mouth, and it becomes fluid.
Right.
So liquid light gel, very gel-like, but the more I mix it around,
Yes. It levels out.
it levels out. It's very hard to do that in the confines of this. But yeah, the more I do that, the more it levels out. I can get rid of all that gel-like consistency.
But then when it's at rest,
And I got a
some of
little
the,
blue in there.
the thickness
Yep.
comes back. Wow.
Yeah, but what that does, we'll see as we'll flip
Yes.
this in a minute, right? Just like we did
Right.
the other, and it's gonna be very controlled, much more than the fine detail.
Yes.
And then we've got liquid impasto. So if any of you out there, you've been studying oil painting or art, just art in general, impasto, thick brush strokes, right? Liquid impasto medium is a gel which makes very thick marks,
I just want to touch.
right? Now all of these, you can touch it if you
Don't
want,
like art.
all of
I know.
those are going to be very glossy, and
Yes.
liquid impasto,
That
if
looks
we
like it'd
make
be much more matte.
well,
Or satin
yeah,
maybe?
kind of. It's not as glossy as
Mhm.
these three, but hold that again. You're ahead of me on each
I'm
one.
sorry.
Hold on. No, you're
I'm
good. You're good.
Okay, so this
Um,
is as much for me as them because I'm like, ah.
All right, so look at that kind of ridge. It's gonna
Yeah,
hold that
oh yeah,
ridge,
you can get nice.
right? The next one, the last one, is liquid oleopasto, and while
you know, we did a mediums show just so I could see what that looked like.
did you really? Wow, that's
I was like, there's all these mediums I've never used. Let's do a medium. Oh yeah,
that's
see,
where you
'cause
definitely see
that's-
how much more matte.
That's the money shot
Yeah,
right there.
yeah.
That's just fantastic.
Right. So liquid oleopasto,
Can you lift that up a little so they can see?
absolutely. Matter of
Like,
fact,
Of
so
this.
they can see the
Straight up to the-
texture?
oh, straight up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
And then we can see it from
Yeah.
the side too.
There we
Yeah.
go. Cool.
Oh yeah, there you go.
So yeah, so you can tell here, much
Yeah.
more matte,
Yeah, yeah.
right, than here. And also, I'm going to put it back down here for a second. When I can make actually, let's do this. Let's go back to you, Amy. I'm going to put
Yeah,
this
just
out
put some
again.
nice big-
I want you to feel the difference between these two. and then you can explain it to everybody just how different. So spread out liquid impasto. You can tell obviously they're both gel-like, but if you don't feel it,
Okay, it's actually pretty firm.
it's pretty firm
That's definitely very firm.
until you.
Oh no, that's like it. I know it doesn't have it in it, but it feels like mediums that have marble dust and stuff
Yeah.
like that in it.
Yeah.
And it's got more kind of a stringy nature. It
Yeah.
wants to pick up. Wow, that's okay. So this sounds weird. It
Yeah.
feels like the putty that when you're doing makeup, as a theater minor, did a lot of makeup. It's the same texture of that
You are
putty.
so out of my wheelhouse right now.
Well,
but
when
I'm
you're
going with
making
yeah.
scars or
Oh,
things
oh, I
like
see.
that.
Oh, yes, I
it's,
see,
it's
like special
literally
effects.
the same texture.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And,
No.
and it looks like the same color too, which is
Yeah.
even creepier.
Yeah. So
Yes.
what'll happen is you'll get these. This will stay with like these harder
Yeah,
peaks to it.
Uh-huh.
Oleopasto has more of a rounded
Yes, definitely.
nature to it.
Yes, it's much more natural.
Yeah, and all of these will speed up the drying rate
Mhm.
by 50%, which is amazing with something that thick. And let's turn it around just like we did the
Now,
other.
question
Yeah.
with these two,
Mm.
what's the ratio that's the maximum amount of these you can mix with the color before you're going to have issues?
Yeah, good question. These are not. I should clarify something here I'm glad you brought that up. So these are mediums.
Right.
These are
Yeah,
ready
yes.
to paint with. They
Right.
have a solvent content
Right.
in them already, as opposed to the drying oils that we talked about before,
Right.
where we want to mix
Right.
some solvent to it.
Right.
Right? And you can actually, you can smell that a little bit with these as well. But your ratio, you can go pretty far with these.
Really?
Yeah. So let's
Okay.
get back to that because I want
All
to
right.
mix color with it.
Okay.
So hold that thought for
And
a
it
sec.
looks like they've got a couple questions.
They have some
We'll
questions.
do that and then we'll.
Yeah.
Oh yeah! Wow, that fine detail just
Real quick.
goes.
Can you mix the original and the liquid original and the fine detail together to get something in between?
Yeah, good question. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. You can do that. Absolutely. That's a really good question. That's sort of like.
That's true for all of them?
Yeah, they could be intermixed, and that's. But here's the thing. So liquid fine detail and oleopasto.
Yeah, there's solids in that. That's
Could
not,
could you mix the two
You
together?
would have a biceps.
It's, but the thing
if
is,
you've got it
you know,
creamy enough to-
you're going with
Right.
something extremely fluid
Right.
and something extremely thick.
Better to save those and get a medium in between.
Yeah,
If-
stay
if
in
you,
your-
you use them, why?
Why? It's
Yeah.
almost sort of like if we were talking about acrylic mediums,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
there was a matte medium
Yes.
and there was a
And a
gloss
gloss.
medium, you could combine those two to make a satin.
But they're the exact same viscosity.
The exact same
So that
viscosity.
makes sense.
That makes
when you're
sense.
taking something like this, to mix it thoroughly enough where it's going to impart the qualities that you desire. You're never going to get it consistent each
Right.
time, right?
Right.
To me.
Right. What I would do if I wanted, liquid original here, is something that's probably in between light gel and impasto in,
Right.
in its thickness already.
Right.
Let's put a little bit of color on. I'm going to
Yeah,
put
very
out
much
some
so. I think that's a good.
alizarin crimson this time.
What was your question, Amanda, while
I have
he's
a
putting the paint
Yeah.
on?
viewer that would like to know like how the archival rate is with these alkyds. Like, does
Yeah.
it affect it?
Yeah, there's been a lot of tests. Like I said, alkyds came out in the WInsor Newton was the first to market an alkyd for commercial use for artists. There's been tests that we've had done with the Tate, Britain, and they have proven to be flexible, if not more so than traditional oils
Right.
over time. So yeah, their flexibility is wonderful, and they have the ability to, well, you asked this question about color. Let's take a look right here. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna put out more of this here.
Yeah.
Now, that's a lot of color
I'm
right
sorry.
there.
Here, let's turn it so they can read which is which.
Oh, thank you.
That is a lot of color.
That's a lot of color right there. Now, pigment's the most expensive thing in your color.
Yes.
Right, it's
Which
the
is
thing-
what mediums can be helpful for.
Right. So
Spending
let's
that
do this. Let's
cost.
put that out, and let's take all that oleopasto.
Oh, look at the color.
Right, now the more I add a medium, the more I'm going
Yeah.
to make it a bit more transparent for sure.
Yeah,
But in terms of volume of paint,
that's,
right there.
yeah. Yeah, you had a tiny blob like that that's
Yeah.
now as much of that.
Yep.
So if opacity isn't what you're worried about,
Right.
that's
That's a
perfect.
nice way
yes.
to be able to extend.
Oh, yeah,
You were talking about that before. The ability to
Mhm.
extend your paint, the ability to get that to glide and move.
Well, and when customers would ask about, this paint's very paste-like compared to this paint. There's a lot of paints that are brushable out of the tube,
Yeah.
but what you're losing in that is the concentration of pigment that can get you further.
Yeah.
There's a lot more pigment for your dollars.
Absolutely.
That's why mediums are very important, because besides helping you with each of with the styles of painting that you're wanting to do,
Mhm.
kind of make that work better or dry quicker,
Yes.
or whatever, you're also making that tube of paint go way further.
You are, but also what you're doing. I mean, if you use the paint simply out of the tube, you're limited by what that viscosity of that paint out of the tube.
Right.
And who as an artist wants to be limited, right?
Right. We want
There are times when I have painted on. This is a canvas board. I
Right.
don't prefer canvas boards. I like canvas or linen. And it's got this wonderful texture to
Yes.
it, and I like the drag that I get
Mhm.
across the surface.
Okay.
But there's also times I've painted on masonite.
Yes.
The same paint mixture that I used on canvas on a slick surface
Yes,
like masonite
it's
will slide across the
totally different.
surface.
Yep.
I could wipe into it and get back down to the surface a lot easier, reveal lower portions of it. So there's a different feel and
Right.
viscosity based on the surface alone.
Right.
So this, on a rough surface, compared to this on a
Yes.
smooth surface, is going to feel different as
Right.
well.
Right.
So you brought up that initial point of testing the drying rate of a color on the surface that you're going to use,
Yes.
but also test how does it feel
Mhm.
on the surface that you're using. So and the way I could visually describe that for you guys, if we go art history, right, and probably two names everybody
Let's
knows.
do that.
Let's do that. Let's go right. Van Gogh. Everybody knows Van Gogh.
Yeah.
Right. Thick
Yes.
brush strokes, right?
Right.
But then let's take somebody like Vermeer
Yes.
and look at this beautiful thin glaze of color that we could get. Really rich.
So pretty. Yes.
What happens when we do this, Amy, as opposed to this? We make it more transparent.
Right.
Look at how the white shows
Yes.
through, or whatever I'm painting on top of.
Right.
So if I had an underpainting that had, doesn't matter what the subject is, but it
Right.
was white and yellow,
Mm-hmm.
and I glazed this red over top, I would start to get these warmer orange glows
Right.
because it would see through, right?
Right.
It's like
Right.
putting a piece of colored cellophane over something,
Right.
as opposed to this situation where light is not coming through.
Right.
So sort of more of a direct method of painting.
Right.
Boom, put that color down next to another, and so on and so on. I block my color in, as opposed to indirect, where I can put this over top of something.
Frida, you had a question. What was
Yes.
I've got a couple of questions actually.
Sure.
You
Ian
keep
would
yours
like
quiet.
to know sunflower oils, olive oils, and grapeseed oils.
Oh,
What makes those not
Art appropriate.
yeah.
sure. Well, so one of the things I could say about that is think of something like olive oil. Olive oil is not a drying oil.
Right.
All right. So spill that on your counter. If we spilled some stand oil on just a counter at home, let's say in the kitchen.
Right.
Well, don't have your art supplies in the kitchen anyway. But let's just say, or you spill it on any surface,
Right.
any table. After a few days, that would start to set up.
Right.
Spill olive oil on there.
Right.
And it is going to just remain wet the whole time.
Right.
Another thing that reminds me of, and this goes back to art history a little bit, is Willem de Kooning. Right? Willem de Kooning experimented, I believe, don't quote me on this one out there, guys, but you can Google it right now. I think it was some of his paintings in the 70s. But I remember seeing a show at the Museum of Modern Art in Manhattan. It's got to be over 10 years ago now. And he had these paintings that he used a safflower oil that was a food grade safflower oil.
Oh no.
Yeah, and if you actually, it was called Sappho Life, Saffo Life, safflower oil, he would get it at a grocery store, and it would just remain so fluid and wet. And if you look at those paintings, he was making them in the 70s out at his studio in the Hamptons. And they're very expressionistic paintings,
Right.
very fluid moving things, but they're a conservator's nightmare.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So food grade as compared to artist grade.
Right.
And the same thing could be said for linseed oil.
Right.
If you go to a hardware store,
Oh,
you
God,
can buy
yeah.
linseed oil in,
Yeah.
in a gallon
Yeah.
container for way,
It's meant for wood
yeah, but way less.
because who cares if it yellows on wood?
Absolutely, who cares?
I
if
mean,
it
if you've
yellows?
ever seen pine that's not been sealed, it is usually white as can be, maybe
Sure.
a little yellow depending on the type of pine.
Yeah.
As soon as you put that on it, anything
Right,
that's
right.
got that in it
Right.
starts yellowing up, and it gets darker
Yeah.
and darker
It
and
does.
darker over time.
It does.
If you do any woodworking,
So much more impurities in it.
Yes,
And also think about what
yes.
you're doing when you're using
Yes.
hardware grade materials or even house paint.
right?
When you're using things like that, you don't expect the room
No,
that you
the-
paint in 100 years.
Right.
You're
Or
probably gonna
even the
change the
house.
color.
Or
No,
even
right.
the house. You're expecting maybe 20 years out of it. At most, it's not designed to be archival long term.
Right, right.
It might be acidic.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, plus, you probably just get bored and want
yes.
to change the color anyway over time.
Yes.
So, but your paintings, you want them to last. So these are all
Yes,
considerations
yes.
that you have to have. And let's go back to
Yeah.
Liquid Original here.
That's actually my next set of questions.
Ah, go ahead.
Once you open the bottle of liquid,
Yeah.
how long will it last?
Uh-huh.
Will it dry up or congeal with time?
Yeah.
And should you add any solvent to it whenever you open it?
Yeah, no, you don't need to add it. Let's start with the last one. You don't need to add any solvent to it. It's ready to go as it is. If you wanted to add a drop or so to it, yeah, but it is meant to be the
Right.
consistency it is and work that way. Yeah, anytime you let oxygen
Yes.
into here, yeah, it's going to want to congeal over time. So here's what happens sometimes.
Considering
People-
these dry faster than the drying oils.
Right. So there's
So-
a few things. If I have, if I have like the bottle, I don't know, there's a little bit out of it.
Mm-hmm.
If I have the bottle half empty or something, I'd suggest, and I don't have a piece of plastic here or something like that, but I just stuff a little wad of something in there. You could do that with any of your drying oils to take up the space where oxygen
So it
would
doesn't.
be.
Mhm.
Yeah, and anything like that that you can then just pull out easily and chuck at the next session. But also cap things.
Yes.
Sometimes people
What
will.
pallet cups are for, to put the amount you need.
Yeah.
And don't get a bunch out. Better to open this 3 times while you're painting and get some out than put so much out that it's been sitting there for 7 hours
Yeah.
and then going and putting it back in
Oh,
there
yeah,
when
yeah,
it's
yeah.
already started to.
Yeah.
We've had people that have done that and then they don't understand why
Yeah.
their liquid.
And don't do that anyway because you're probably
Yes,
going to
even
contaminate it with the
yes,
color.
Yes.
Yeah, no,
Yes.
it's a good point, Amy, because what happens is sometimes, maybe something's drying like that in the jar, and I'll say to people, well, do you cover it?
Right.
Well, they'll say yes, but they're talking about they covered at the end
Yeah,
of
at
the
the end,
4-hour
yes.
painting
Mhm.
session. 3 of
Yep.
those a week. Now it's been 12
Yep.
hours that it's been open.
Yep.
You also don't want to don't have the stuff
No,
where you're
there's no point in having.
breathing it.
Yep.
Anyway, so put the cap back on. Always a good thing to do. To pay attention. Pay attention to studio safety. But sorry, you can go back to just now that we have
Yeah.
color in there. Glossy, not quite as glossy, much
But
more
it's nice.
satiny.
It's nice how this light gel is very much like this, just thicker.
Yeah.
And it's still got that kind of beautiful glaze-like
Absolutely.
quality. Just you can see that little bit.
Yeah.
We should tilt it just like
Yeah.
to try to catch the light with it so you can kind of see a little bit better.
Hey, where does liquid fit into the fat over lean rationale?
Ah, good question.
There you go.
I see it.
Got that.
Yeah, and it might be good to I've always heard, and just the research I've done says you either paint with these,
Yeah.
or you paint with these. We don't.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
don't cross.
Yeah,
It's like
sure.
speaking 2 different languages.
Sure. So I consider, what we started out with our drying oils, like the drying linseed, the poppy
Right.
safflower, all those 7 we originally looked at. I would call those our traditional drying oils, right? The traditional things.
Old school.
Right. Old school if we want to go that way. New school here, our synthetic. drying alkyds here.
Right.
So yeah, I wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
cross over and use the two because you're dealing with totally different
Right.
drying rates. So if you were to paint with these, all
Right.
of our traditional ones,
Mhm.
even the fastest one, the thickened
Mhm.
linseed oil, is all going to dry much slower than this.
Right.
So I wouldn't be putting liquid, and that's it's a really great question because for a long time we've gotten less questions about this at Winsor Newton in the last few years. But I've been with the company for a while, and a lot of people would call up, and they, for some reason, because the internet,
Right.
they would use liquid as a varnish.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've had
Have
so
you-
many
have you
people
come
ask
across
that,
that?
and I'm like, it's a painting medium.
Yeah, they would use it as a varnish.
Yeah.
And so there's
No.
a few things about that. Yeah, it's gonna dry much faster than that oil underneath. That you're with your traditional drying oils. That's one. It's also not removable.
Yeah.
As well, and your varnish should be something
Right.
that is
That you can take off
yeah.
to take environmental pollutants or whatever off and
dirt, dust, abrasions, scratches, you name
well, and
it.
it ages over time.
You name it.
Give it
yeah.
a nice fresh,
Any
cleaning
of those.
and coat.
Any of those. So yes, another question.
One of our customers or viewers has had an issue with the liquid fine detail, the lid essentially getting stuck.
Yeah, good. That's a really good question. I can totally 100% address that because we've had that. We did have an issue where some caps had a problem inside. So these are childproof caps. They're meant to go down. They're childproof caps. They're not people-proof
Right.
caps. We had a batch of them that the inside rotated. So when you push down, you usually have to push down on a childproof cap and go like quarter turn.
Yeah.
You'd have to push down and go almost
Yes.
a 3/4,
Yes,
and
I
obviously
remember.
your wrist doesn't go that way. So that was a batch of bad caps we got, which has been fixed now. If there's some floating around out there, you can reach out to us and we'll take care of you on that. But yeah, that was simply a cap issue.
The liquid getting on like
Oh,
the
inside.
thread and
Yeah.
gluing it
Oh.
on.
And
Yeah.
you know what that happens? That even happens with drying oils.
Yeah,
It's good to clean the threads.
Acrylic paint.
It
Yeah.
happens. It happens with all paints. Yeah, I would. It sounds like a.
Cleaning with mineral spirits.
Yeah, you could definitely do that. I mean, it seems like a silly, and I'm not being flippant about it, but it seems like a silly thing to just make sure they're cleaned out.
It seems too easy.
It seems too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But everybody's excited to paint.
Yeah.
You're not always being the most careful when you dump it out, and if it's runnier, it tends to get on the threads. People don't notice until it gets
Goes down
all
the side.
gummy. Yep.
Absolutely. But yes, you could take a little bit of mineral spirits and do that and clean it out.
Clean
but
both the threads on the inside of the cap
absolutely.
and on the bottle itself.
But yeah, and this is somebody who can get quite messy with my own supplies. I'm sure you do
I've
too.
seen pictures.
Yeah. So, yeah. Try to just be careful about that, and you won't have that problem. But yes, you could take a little solvent and begin to clean that out, and then any other residue scrape away with a palette knife. But you should be fine otherwise. Let's
All right,
let's move that over because I want to look at some other things, and then if other questions come in about the drying
Yeah, that's
oils
fine.
and the alkyds,
I'll
we
put it
can
back
go
here.
back to them. But I want to take a look at. I'm going to take a piece of
right there in case we need it.
paper here, and I'm going to take.
Arches oil paper. Just so that
Yeah, this is Arch oil paper, so it's a paper that's been primed, right?
Mhm.
So again, sort of one-on-one, don't want to assume anything, but if you paint on paper with oil will seep through, degrade the paper over time. It'll do the same thing to canvas.
Yes.
So you want to make sure it's primed.
Mhm.
So just so you can see that, this is Arch oil paper, which you can also paint with acrylic on it as well.
Yep. Oh,
Try to
nice.
paint with watercolor on it. It's not absorbent enough.
Right.
And it just you won't get
Oil
good washes.
pastels work amazing on that.
Oil pastels
I really
will work.
like it on there.
Yeah, well, so I'm gonna use that, and I wanna make note of this, Amy. This is important, right? So if you're somebody who needed that information about drying oils and/or alkyds, it means you're experimenting. You're trying to figure out what works for you. Do the same thing with color. Know what the primary colors are in the range of paint that you're using. That's super important. So this is Permanent Rose. This is Winsor Newton Artist Oil Color. Permanent Rose. We've got Winsor Lemon, and we've got Winsor Blue Red Shade, which is a phthalo blue. I'm going to put that out as well. And what we'll do, Amy, I think we're going to take a little bit of titanium white.
Okay.
I'm going to put that out here. So titanium white, very cool white, a very opaque white. And I'm also going to take some, and I'm going to actually, let's jot that down. Titanium white, and then let's write this next one down. I'm going to put is transparent white.
I'm going to slide this over just a little bit so we can see the writing. There we go.
I have a viewer who said her friend mixes liquid and mineral spirits together on a 1-to-1 ratio. Would you recommend that, or
You could thin it down. You know, again, they're ready to go out of the tube, out of the jar. Just be careful that you don't, again, like we were talking early on, that you don't push your solvent. Yeah, you don't push your solvent ratio so far.
And you would want it to be an artist grade mineral spirits
Absolutely.
too, not just a hardware store.
No. Stay away from that. It's so tempting because of the prices of hardware store and household goods stores. It's tempting.
Right.
Not great though. So these colors, let's look at two things. I want to see the strength of the color itself. So I'm going to take titanium white, and I'm actually going to put out some more color. I didn't put out enough, Amy, and that's something when you're playing with color, when you're testing color, put out a little more than you think. Thank you. I'll grab the wrong one. It's like
That's what I'm here.
having a studio assistant, which I've never had in my life. Let's take some color again, roughly a 1-to-1 ratio. And
Oh, wow.
look at what happens when you choose two different whites. This is titanium white
So
up top. Titanium white.
We always tell viewers it's the punch you in the face white.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It is a punch you in the face white. And this, the transparent white is like, oh, hey.
I know.
That's nice. Oh,
Bless your heart.
Did that get weird, Amy?
Bless your color heart. No.
No? Okay.
Was that the arch oil paper?
This
Yes.
is the arch oil paper,
I think it was
correct.
weird enough when we had matching bracelets
found out we had
matching
matching-
bracelets and didn't know.
And what did you tell me it is?
It's lava stone.
Lava. I had no
I was
idea.
like, bah.
Because I just found mine. So I'm going to take, again, roughly a 1-to-1 ratio.
Oh, that becomes very lemony.
Yep. And that's where what happens is, first of all, and again, let's do this just for viewers.
So
Let's go. This
Such
is
a cold yellow. Ooh.
permanent rose right there. Winsor lemon. And then this is Winsor blue red shade. And I'm gonna already put out more, right? It didn't put out enough any one of those times. I'm gonna put out extra here as well. And make sure I clean off my palette. But what'll happen is when you get a tint like this, you'll see, you'll bring out the color bias. So what you can tell is this is actually sort of a cool
Yes,
red, right?
very much so.
Permanent rose. And we can even tell that, Amy, when we look at the back. The back has a pigment number on it,
violet.
PV19. So if you look at the back of your tube of paint, it can kind of tell you what's going on with that pigment. Pigment violet, right? A violet is something that has more blue in it. 19 is just the chronological order in which that specific pigment was logged as a color index number.
Quinacridone rose,
It
which
is a quinacridone. Yeah, good. That's a whole other thing. If we were just talking
know.
color mixing, we'd
That's
get into
just-
quinacridones.
I
But
think
I'll.
we didn't look all those up for
Yeah, we had to look them all up for something once.
Yeah.
pigment episodes too.
Yeah. Oh, that's so nice. Nice and rich.
Right, and again, we can see that this is
Yes.
right. It gets a bit more pasty.
Yes.
So I think it's good to have a transparent white in your
I
palette
agree.
if you have a white, because it can save you from getting too pasty.
Right.
Oftentimes people will thin everything, or not thin, but tint everything with titanium white, and it can again just overpower. And again, there's nothing wrong with the colors up top, the tints. That's gorgeous.
Yeah.
Right, but think about something here too. I mean, a lot of times when in the education program I run, the Fine Art Collective, we talked about to people about the difference between student and professional grade colors. You know, the professional grade colors often have more pigment load.
Right.
Right. So,
And that's, although that's not always the case, sometimes it can actually be different pigments.
it can
Where
be different
something
pigments.
is,
Absolutely.
something is called one name, and
Absolutely.
then like a lemon yellow, and it's not the traditional pigments that
Right.
are in most lemon yellows.
That's true. But a
Because
lot
they're-
of times
they're more
what
expensive.
happens is you don't have the punch
Right.
in the student grade.
Yes.
You know, the saturation
Definitely.
of color.
Or you may, or in phthalo, because phthalo is a less expensive
Mhm.
pigment, you may have way more punch in that same grade.
You might.
And then it might be very weak in
Correct.
your yellow, and then when you go to mix, it's just horribly overwhelming.
Yeah. So if you have a student grade color that doesn't quite have the punch when you
Yes.
mix the titanium white,
To use the, yeah.
use the transparent white, and it won't
Oh, look
it
at
won't.
that.
What did you say?
Nice.
It won't punch it in the face.
Yeah, yeah.
So much. But look at how much stronger.
That's
I
that's
got
a
tiny
huge
bit,
difference.
Tiny bit of yellow
I
in there.
know.
Whoops.
Ugh.
Tiny bit of yellow in there.
Your red shade now isn't.
Yeah. This red shade is not. Right. So
Nice.
let's do this now. Let's wipe this off and let's take a take a
Yeah,
look
yes,
at
yes.
why
Phthalo.
it's important to know what your primary color is. Well, here's permanent rose again. And I'm going to take some Winsor blue, red shade, right, the primary color
Mhm.
in the Winsor Newton Artist Oil color range. And I'm going to go, you know what I'm going to do actually? I'm only going to take part of that, right? Because the phthalo blue is such a strong
Right.
color. I'm going to do that. I'm going to mix the permanent rose with it.
Mm.
We can see some of
Yeah.
that, right? But then let's get the color to come out a little bit more.
Mhm.
That's the transparent. Let's do it with the titanium, actually. Let's do it with that one.
I'm an assistant.
Yeah, you're an assistant. I like that.
Oh, that color is so gorgeous.
Right? Look at that beautiful,
Wow.
right? That you can tell that the phthalo
Oh.
blue has a strong,
Yeah, it does.
right? So let's add a little bit more of the permanent rose to it. But what we're getting is a really beautiful violet
Right, but a lot of
color.
people take those two colors because this is blue after all, and this is
Right.
a rose,
So-
kind of a red, and then they get this and they're like, oh.
Well, yeah. See, here,
but
but here's what's
look
cool
what the
though.
range of it is.
Yeah, and then let's take the transparent white again. But the beauty of this, Amy, is that you can get a chromatic black.
Yes,
This could act
very
as a
much so,
black
yes.
for you. And then let's just let this down a little bit more with the transparent white.
Oh,
Yeah, that's a gorgeous, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so why is that important? Because let's do this now. Let's not pay attention to the fact that these are the primary colors in the range. Let's take cobalt blue, which is a blue, obviously, cobalt blue, and let's take cadmium red. All right. Two very nice colors. The red has overpowered that
oh,
blue
yes.
in a huge way. Okay, fine. So let's add more blue, right? You almost get a color that looks like if you were painting bricks on a house.
Yeah.
Wouldn't be a bad.
It's almost, it's a little bit like an Indian red.
Yeah, kind of like an Indian.
Yeah.
And again, not a bad color.
No, as
But
long
it's-
as you
it-
know
but-
that's
but-
what you
yeah,
could get, that's
exactly.
great.
But it's not.
Which is why you
A
play with
violet.
your colors.
Yeah, it's not a violet. So let's add more blue. Doesn't
Now
matter.
it almost looks umbery.
Almost looks more umber.
Uh-huh.
We're not going to get that,
Right.
right? So let's add a little white even to see. Obviously, we know it's not that violet, but what do we get when we add some white? That was titanium white. You can see more of the violet in it,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a very, very dull.
Yeah,
Violet.
it's almost just a nice kind of warm gray, and that's
It's kind of like a warm gray. And that's not bad.
No,
if
it's-
that's what you want.
yeah.
But here's the thing, Amy, I'm never, and for all you guys out there, I'm never going to get this to be that.
no.
However, I could take some yellow ochre And while this isn't going to get exactly, actually no, let me use, sorry, I don't want to use yellow ochre. I want to go a little higher key even to show you. Let's go with the Windsor lemon again. Yeah, let's do that, keeping with my primaries.
Okay.
I could take this, and that's going to gray that down,
Yeah, it did.
but it gets more greenish.
Yeah, it does.
So look, I can take that beautiful violet and get closer to that,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm never going to get there
Right.
from there. I'm never going to take that dull color. And why did that happen? It happened, and I can illustrate it pretty much with this board that I have here, Amy. What I'm talking about is inorganic and organic pigments. The cadmium, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cadmium is something, it's a metal.
Mm-hmm.
It was never alive, so we call it inorganic.
Right.
Never alive. And cadmium particles, or inorganic
Mhm.
pigments tend to be larger particle sizes.
Right.
They tend to be much more opaque,
Right.
and they tend to gray down when you mix them.
Right.
That's part of what's happening here because I was using a
Mhm.
cadmium and a cobalt.
Right. So you've got two metal-based.
Two metal-based colors,
Mm-hmm.
right? Red and blue, but two metal-based
Right,
colors,
right.
two larger pigment particle sizes, and they end up giving this sort of dull kind of muted
Right.
look to it. But when we have the other colors that I used here, which was a quinacridone,
Right.
permanent rose is a quinacridone color, and the phthalo blue,
Right.
those are both organic colors.
Right.
They're based on petroleum, so if the dinosaurs weren't around, we wouldn't have those. They tend to be higher in key already, higher
Right.
in saturation.
Right.
They also tend to be transparent colors, and they give us this beautiful,
Right.
clean color mix.
Nice.
So super, super important to know what your primary colors are in a given range. And let's tear that sheet off.
Do we have any questions
Yeah.
right now, guys? Oh,
Got
they're like a bazillion, Katie. Was that the?
No, they're just
The-
all over the place.
Yeah, yeah,
But not
Some
that
that
they're
are
just
not on
because
topic.
yeah. That's
It's not that they're off topic. They're just there's so much information,
Yeah.
and everybody's kind of picking and going.
Right.
To know a little bit of something. So
well. Since it's kind of off topic, why don't we have him explain a little bit more about those whites? Because I think if anybody has anything like that,
that is actually one of the questions.
that would
Oh,
help
good,
clear
good,
that
good,
up.
good, good.
And then blacks, because this
Yeah.
is
Oh, great.
Okay.
Okay.
There's
even
a
though
couple
we're
questions
yeah
there.
Oh,
even
good,
though we're
perfect.
kind of
Yeah.
pushing time, this is still very important information. And if there was anybody we wanted to get this from, it's Jimmy. So.
Good. So 5 whites in the Windsor Newton range:
Mhm.
titanium, zinc, underpainting, flake white hue, and transparent white. And I've got these things written down here, so this is a good thing to go look back later on. But titanium white, your most popular, highly opaque. You just saw that in the
Yes.
mixtures that I made. Highly opaque, so it overpowers quite a bit, and it's a medium drying rate
Right.
with those colors. Zinc white is much more transparent. You can see that over this black
Right.
stripe right
Right.
here, just how opaque this is. Titanium white, very, very cool too. Still cool with zinc white, but the zinc in there makes it a semi-transparent color, and it's much more slow drying rate
Right.
as well. Underpainting white is a rapid drying rate.
Right.
And why? Well, titanium white and zinc white both have safflower oil. We saw that when we compared
Right.
the oils. It was our
Okay.
slowest
Mhm.
drying one. And again, the safflower oil was there because it was very, very pale.
Right.
So it doesn't affect these
Right.
and make them
Exactly.
yellow. Okay, so that's key. We've got linseed oil in this one. That's why it's called underpainting white.
Mhm.
So Amy, if you wanted to have, or any of you out there wanted to make a painting, and you were going to work in a indirect style,
Right.
you were going to use a white and a black, and you were going to make a what's called a grisaille painting,
Mhm.
all in grays,
Right.
and then paint with glazes over top,
This
underpainting
would
white.
be definitely what you want to
It
use.
would be
yes.
the one you'd want to use in the,
Now,
in
is
the
that
lower
all
layers.
titanium based, or is it titanium and zinc? I'm just curious.
Titanium and zinc, yeah,
Okay.
good question. Because titanium, there's combinations of titanium and zinc.
Mhm.
And what that does is it changes the opacity
Mhm.
of the colors. It also helps to keep the paint more flexible.
Yes.
As well. Flake white hue. So hue is not, this is always the thing, I feel like people think that hue means that something is
Substandard.
substandard.
I mean, that's what a lot of people think that
substandard.
means. It's just a replacement.
It's a replacement. So flake white, genuine flake white has lead in it. And we've moved away from that. Amy, you like the lead? I grew up using a lot of lead as well. There's a few things that come into play with stuff like that. Sometimes, and this is the case with lead, we did not have a supplier that we used to have that really gave us the best quality, and we found that what we were getting was not the quality that we expected. We've also made a move as a company to try to be more sustainable in a lot of ways, and the people handling such pigments.
Well, and cleanup takes on a whole different thing.
Absolutely.
For being decode and all
that.
So
what you'll find with flake white hue, it will have the same stiffness that the lead counterpart had. So if you like the traditional lead-based flake white hue, we'll do that. If you tell us a little bit more of I don't know if you guys can see it there, it's hard, but a warmer. Right, a warmer color there as well. And then transparent white, which we were just using. Right. See just how, this is where you can really tell how transparent that is. I think if we were looking at zinc white just on its own, we'd say, well, that's transparent. Right. Then when we really see what transparent white is doing here, highly transparent. And again, a slow drying rate that we have in there. So to me, our most popular, probably acrylics, oils, the most popular thing. I would bet everybody out there has titanium white in their toolbox. Right. So what I would really look at then as a possibility is either a transparent white or a zinc white. Right. Depending on how transparent you want to go.
Now I'm going to open the worm can about zinc. We get a lot of questions about it, and that's why I'm sure that you guys were going to probably have had some questions too. About zinc being more brittle, it being where people are finding that it's cracking like years down there. And some of that is just as easily explained as improper painting procedures because they didn't realize how extremely brittle it was. But what is WInsor Newton's current take on that? Because there's Williamsburg won't make it anymore now. And they've taken it out of all their stuff, which I think in some cases is it's still not giving painters the option of something that they've used, and it's not necessarily educating them as to why either. So
that's a question that we get, and it's a question that's been posed to our lab, and we go through tests, and those tests are kept on file, and we have not found that to be the case with the zinc that we use. Because these are questions we get all the time, and you guys can reach out to us. When I say us, when you reach out to WInsor Newton, you're going to get a person who works for me who will answer one of the questions. That sometimes comes to me, and then it goes to the lab as well. So it's definitely a question that that's been posed to us as well. We've not found that to be the case.
Well, and in just doing a little bit of research on it, a lot of the ones I found that I've heard people have had a lot of cracking issues were also poppy seed oil based, which is slow drying, and it's a much more brittle oil. And not everybody's grind is the same on their zinc. It seems like it does vary a little in how it feels manufacturer. I theorize that might be even some of the issue where some people have problems with it and then some people don't.
Yeah, it very well could be. The beauty of having a lab that we've had people in that lab for a long time is that there's a track record there. So we go through light fastness tests. Whether you're buying the artist oil color or you're buying our Winton student grade color, they're going through the same light fastness tests. They're going through storage tests. Swatches are being made of the colors. And what happens, for all you out there, there is a date. You're not going to be able to see it on here. I don't think I'm.
Yeah, it's stamped on the crimp.
But it's stamped on the crimp. That date code will tell me the week and the year that was manufactured.
Okay.
And if we think that there is a problem, I can go to our lab, they can check, and then they can look at samples they have, and they can find out what's going on. So it's a nice way for us to cross-reference what goes on.
Cool.
Yeah, very, very cool. And then let's take a look at some blacks right here. This is where I'm gonna put some of this out, because this is where I'm gonna give you a little bit of. We'll put this right over here.
There you go.
Put it right there. But I'm gonna put out Perylene Black is this one up here. And you've had this on the show before, I think, and I wanna show something here. Perylene Black. Obviously, it looks black, right, as the name suggests. we're gonna take a white.
Yeah, which
pick
one do you
any.
want?
I don't know, pick a white anyway.
Do
It
you
doesn't
want
matter.
transparent?
Sure,
Right there.
transparent's fine. We'll take transparent white, and we're gonna see very, very clearly what is already dried over to the side.
Yeah, this just blows my mind.
But this is kind of like magic right here,
Yes.
I think.
It's sorcery. Witchcraft.
Look at how gorgeous
Ah,
that green. We use transparent white,
look at that.
so it's a very deep, deep green. I'm gonna use a bit more of it actually, because I want to bring out a little bit. This was done with titanium.
Oh, yeah.
I want to bring out some more of the color.
Yes, this is much softer.
It is. There we go. Gonna bring out some more of that. But what I like about this, Amy, is this is where I would play with color mixing if I was in the studio and had a little perylene black. Because I'd look at that and I'd say, well, let's take a little bit of Windsor yellow. Let's take a little bit of, I don't know, let's take some cadmium lemon, right? A cooler yellow.
Yes.
Let's take a little bit of transparent yellow. And let's actually take some burnt sienna as well. And if we have this, ooh, do I have enough? Ooh, just have enough.
Wow.
Look at that gorgeous. You know, you think
is
of
a lovely green. Yeah, you
think of your blues and your yellows making the green, but the perylene is already a black that pushes so green. That's a gorgeous, gorgeous color right there.
The sad thing is the monitor doesn't pick it up as well as the color right on the.
You can see it a little bit better than.
Oh, okay.
Well, that one you should be able to see.
Oh, wow, yeah.
I mean, look at that. Look at. You wouldn't think that that's
No,
striking
no.
green,
Yeah, yeah.
right? How gorgeous is that? And this is what I'm talking about. Like it's wonderful to take your primary colors and make your mixes, but then just having a color like that in the palette. Look at how wonderful this wide array. Now you're not going to get what you're going to have happen here. We've got the very red of the burnt umber, and we've got the green here, and we can knock that back.
Yeah, that's so pretty though.
A little bit. Let's use a little bit more of what we
Yeah,
have
just
up
tiny
here.
bit. That's nice.
Right. So
very
again,
rich
if
color.
we want to have more of almost what could fit in here as a chromatic black, right, or a
Definitely.
chromatic gray, and even if we take a little bit more color, or sorry, a little bit more white in this case, bring this out just a little bit more. Yeah, look at that. Almost get.
That's so
I
nice.
won't get too close.
Yeah,
but
no,
almost,
it is very much a khaki almost.
right.
Yeah.
Almost a khaki in there. Yeah, very beautiful. And so in certain value ranges,
Yeah.
you know, you get wonderful things that start to happen
Yeah.
by exploring with something that you probably never would have had
Right.
the thought to do. And to me, if you just sat in your studio and made little color choices like that, like you tried that, and Amy, if you'll tear that off for me. And the same kind of thing with blue-black. Put blue-black down. And again, we'll take another white here. We'll take flake white hue this time. Clean that off. Right, gorgeous, gorgeous color. Let's go back to one of our primary colors here, permanent rose.
Oh, look at that.
That's a phenomenal color.
Yeah, that is.
I mean, that's a phenomenal, phenomenal color that you get out of there. So beautiful. Let that down even just a touch more. So making tints and shades of that.
Wow.
I love that a color like one of those blacks can do that.
Mm-hmm.
Your Mars black is really something that gives you a neutral bias.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't push the green or blue like Perylene and blue black. Obviously blue black lets you know
Mm-hmm.
that right away. Lamp black, one of your oldest, right? Soot
Right,
from lamps
right.
and things like that, going way back to our earliest paintings. A very, very dense black. Has a bit of a bluish bias, but nowhere near as much as blue black. And then ivory black, sort of a brown bias that gets. Slow drying,
Yeah, both of
semi-transparent
those.
as well.
Both of those, good to know. Slow drying.
Those are going to be on your that farther end of the spectrum, like 7 days or
Yep.
more.
People will always paint the edges of their canvas like
Um,
it last.
Yeah.
Which,
Oh, if
I don't
not
even know how many
framing.
times I tell people, always paint it first.
Yeah, if they're
and
not
always
framing.
paint it with the drying medium first. Because yes, then they'll do that and it needs to be somewhere in 2 days and they're calling and going,
Absolutely.
oh, help me, what do I do?
You know, so
wipe
that's
wipe that off.
that's a
B,
key
don't
thing.
do that again.
And you know, when we're using colors like this, I think it's where you take the time to know what you're doing with the color, so that when you
Right.
go to paint, half the battle to me is knowing what you're doing. Because if I make a portrait of you or a landscape, or it
Right.
doesn't matter what the subject is, but let's just say a representational subject for a moment. I measure correctly, I get my composition right.
Right.
It looks like the thing,
Yes.
but in all other aspects, but my color
Right.
isn't what I need it to be.
Well,
It's easy to fail because what you lack is the feeling of the image.
Well, and you've taken all those years to learn drawing and the proper perspective and all that. That didn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
It's an acquired skill.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you have talent or not, it's an
Right.
acquired skill. This is the same thing.
Oh, absolutely.
And this
It's
is just as
100%.
important. And this is where most people fail because they think that they can just open a pretty tube and they're going to get whatever the color they want magically. It's putting in a little bit of study and some work,
Yeah.
which is fun.
For sure. I would say about that too, that yeah, some people maybe tend to have a little bit more of a color sense.
Yes.
You know, just
No, I
like
agree.
people have an ear for music.
Yes.
But it is definitely something that comes with study. And one of the things I used to say to my students is, if they were working on a painting, I said, I don't want you to worry about it looking like something. I want it to feel like something.
Yeah.
So if
yeah,
it was a
I like that.
landscape and you were out there with rudimentary shapes and basic proportions and composition, whatever, a street scene, let's say, or a field or whatever, is going to look like that. Is going to have that image that looks like a field or a street scene. But if that is taking place at dusk,
Right.
at dawn, at a certain time of the year,
Right.
those colors are gonna get you
Right.
there. Yeah, we've got another question.
We have a couple people on Facebook and YouTube asking how the blue-black compares to Payne's Gray. Would you lighten it and tint with it?
Yeah. Oh, I wish we had that's great. I wish we had a Payne's Gray here, and I do not have one here. The blue black. Oh, do you have one?
It's possible.
Oh, people are off.
That's where I'm going.
Wow.
It's just gonna be whether I find the Payne's Gray.
Talk about a question that you're digging down deep for.
Because it seems like a lot of our users are obsessed with the Payne's Gray.
Yeah, Payne's Gray, I find is a deeper color that you'll get at rather than blue black. Do we have one? All right. Well, we're gonna. Wow.
Billion Prussian blues, though.
People are going to bat for you out there on this question.
Down here. Oh, yeah. Hold on for a second, Jimmy. Move
Yep.
for a second. Looks like we probably got
Crash bang.
Perlene in here. Davies Gray. No. Payne's Gray.
Payne's
Ta-da!
Gray.
I got one.
Good job.
Woo!
Whoever you
It's
are
like
out
the
there
quest
asking
for the
that
Holy
question,
Grail.
man, that was like, you got it. Luckily, the tube came off easily.
Ironically, the
top
WInsor Newton
came
was
off
right
easily.
behind us.
So two things. Let's take a look at this here. We've got both semi-transparent colors in this. We've got PB29, which is a pigment blue.
It's ultramarine.
29, which is ultramarine. Yep. And PBK19. If you're looking at a tube of paint, PB is pigment blue. When you see the K, PBK is pigment black. That's how you differentiate between those two. And you've got PB29 also in here, but PBK9 with blue black. I'd have to look that one up, Amy,
I was
honestly.
gonna say, look at the back of the tubes.
And
Let's see,
Payne's
it's
gray we're gonna put down here with flake white hue. Piano 1-to-1.
9 is ivory.
Ivory.
black.
Ivory. So you're getting a little bit more of that brownish bias with that.
I don't know what 19 is off the top.
And you can see that that let down with, again, a 1-to-1 ratio.
Mhm.
It's much more grayish than it is actually blue
Yeah, it is.
when you compare those two. So you almost, if you were looking isolated, I don't think you'd see that, but you can see you've got a stronger color with blue-black. And let's hold it up a little bit too in case.
Yeah. See if that makes any difference.
Right. So something like that, I would say with the blue-black, that you can let that down even more and get closer to this. You're getting a little bit more of that impact of the blue in there.
Right.
Subtle differences with those two. Payne's Gray is a gorgeous, gorgeous color though, and I do have that in a palette when I go out for landscape painting. I'll use either or because you can get some gorgeous things. And again, let's take some of that here, mix in there, and you can see how like shadows,
Oh yeah.
right?
Definitely.
Shadows in a street scene or something like that.
Yes.
Across a road. Gorgeous, gorgeous color right there. Yeah, so that's your comparison there. A little bit stronger on the blue bias with the
Yes.
blue-black. That's why
Yeah,
it
this
pushes
is
that way.
definitely warmer to me
Yeah,
looking.
yeah, and that's the ivory in there. It's doing that. That's that brownish bias right there, which is taking place. So I think also just like the whites, would you have all these in your palette? No, absolutely you wouldn't have all those in your palette. And there's people out there who are going to advocate color mixing and making your own black. I absolutely did that when I was teaching basic painting. I teach 6 colors. I'd go with what's called a split primary palette. So I'd use a warm, cool red, warm, cool yellow, warm, cool blue. And if you go to the WInsor Newton site under Discover, I think the tab is, you can go to oil paint. And you can see what we suggest, again, the permanent rose, Winsor lemon, and Winsor blue red shade. You can also see a 6-color palette. You can see a 12-color palette.
Oh, nice.
You can see that for student grade, which is the Winton range of paint. You can see that for artist oil color as well. And I think that's, I've had interns come in and work for us before, and they see our whole entire display of paint. And they almost lose their mind.
Oh, yeah.
And they're like, oh my gosh, I would love to have all 100 colors. And I say, I would never give you all 100 colors of those because it would be too much to handle.
Right.
You would never learn to mix because you'd grab everything out of the tube.
Right.
And you'd miss the subtleties.
Right.
That
Or
is,
if you even by chance
Yeah.
started learning to mix some of those, because you've got so much going on, you're never going to remember what was what
oh
unless
my
you're
gosh, no.
writing it down constantly,
No.
which nobody does.
No,
that.
and it would be redundant. And
Okay,
quite
yes.
frankly, out of 119 colors in this range, let's say, there's a number of them you're never going to use because it's not your sensibility as an artist.
Right.
Certain colors you just don't gravitate towards in your palette. But that's my strong suggestion to you guys is again, take a look, know what the primaries are in the range of paint that you're using, and again, check out on the WInsor site what the 6 and 12 color palette is. But that'll put you in a position to experiment, to learn about color through that experimentation. Take the time in the studio to do that. Know which white's going to work best for you.
Right.
Know which black's going to work best for you. Know which drying oil is going to work best with you. And again, if we kind of recap going back to the beginning, that's going to be about your drying rate.
Yep.
It's going to be about the color of the drying oil itself. It's going to be about the viscosity. And that's something that I think drying rate, Amy, is something that's very specific to what you're doing as a project.
Right.
But the viscosity is something that has to do with your temperament as an artist.
Right.
And the
Definitely.
feel. It's no different than I tend to not like foods that are really mushy. It's a texture I don't like. So when I said I don't like guacamole, and people lose their minds. Like,
Yeah, it's not the flavor; it's the
No.
texture is gross.
Yes,
High
question. You don't
Oh,
either.
no, I lost my mind.
I
Andy
I
said
I
Yeah,
thought
yeah.
I thought it
No,
was
I was
yeah.
a little, but I've got a
Yeah.
sensory thing too, so it's not guacamole, but it's other
No,
things.
people
where
look
it's
at
just
me
like-
like I
It's okay to
hate
be
kittens
wrong.
and puppies when
Yeah,
I
I
say
know,
I don't like
I know.
guacamole. But it's a texture thing,
Right,
and there's
right.
certain ways
And
I
it's,
paint.
this is the same
There's
same way.
Right, there's
Yep.
a feel that I like, and that is akin to the way that I work, which
Right.
is different possibly than the way you work. So that's a very important thing
Right.
to keep in mind as well. And I would say that those are your important things to note. And again, note what we were talking about before. As we recap here, pay attention. Right, go this way. Pay attention to what you're using in terms of colors.
Right.
You mentioned quinacridone colors, which are in the permanent rose here. Again, high key,
Right.
transparent,
Right.
and you will see transparent colors in our primary ranges because they make clean mixes.
Yes,
You'll
they do.
also notice that unlike let's say the blue-black or the Payne's gray that has multiple pigments, single pigments,
Right.
right? And the single
Right.
pigments mean that if you had 2 pigments here, 2 here, 2 here, and we mixed them all together, now I got 6.
Right. And which we've talked about with the pigment and episode in the student and versus professional grade. We talked about the more stuff you've got optically, the more it will start muddying up.
Yeah, and I think the best way I can explain that is, you have the idea of all these colors, right, seen through a prism, and you get white light.
Right.
That's theory. Take all those colors on a palette, mix them together, and you've got mud. And you might get
Yeah.
some good mud out of it, but
Right.
you're not getting some of the mixes that
Right.
you
It's not clear, bright.
right
color
that
that's-
you'd necessarily want to
Mhm.
get. So that's very important. And finally, let's take a look at this last one here. This is all Mars black, with 2 parts titanium white to 1 part Mars black.
A little bit this way.
A little bit that way.
There we go.
There we go. So you can see there again, all Mars black. Look what happens. Titanium white really knocks that Mars black. Zinc white because
Wow,
it's semi-transparent.
Yeah,
barely.
does anything.
Flake white hue, sort of in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Underpainting white, we pull out more of a bluish gray to it a little bit.
Huh, that's interesting.
And transparent white is the darkest one of those as well. But what you'll also notice, Amy, these are straight out of the tube too. These are just done a little
Right.
while ago without a drying oil. Notice what happens here.
Yeah, look at that.
See, you're seeing some areas are a little bit more glossy.
Right.
Some that are a little bit more thin here.
Mhm.
Just from dragging it out on
Right,
the surface
right.
is a little bit more dull.
Mm-hmm.
There's no medium. There's
Right.
nothing that's been added to it. So the thinner that I get with that, the less sheen
Right.
that you're seeing there. And
Right, you're seeing more pigment as
Yeah.
opposed to the drying oil.
do we have another minute or two?
Yeah.
We do?
Yeah.
We're good? Okay, cool. Because I'm going to show you. Let's go back. Yeah, let's go back here. Let's
You want me to
let's end where we started. Yeah, let's
Okay.
give us one more page off of there, Amy. Because in the traditional drying oil category, these are ready to go.
Yes.
Okay, so this one is artist painting medium.
Mm-hmm.
This is stand oil
Mm-hmm.
and solvent, Sansador
Right.
in this case. So this is a 1-to-1 mixture. This is ready to go. So if you're going out and you're doing a painting session and you don't want to mess with your ratio,
Or if you just want that that thinking process to be not something you have to deal with,
yes,
it's ready to go.
right? And you can see the difference there when you thin that,
Yeah.
right? Look how much
Yeah, definitely.
clearer,
Mhm.
right, that looks than the stand oil. Now also, we recommend artist painting medium when you want to oil out. So this is what reminded me of it right here. Sometimes what happens is you might get some dull areas in your oil painting. There's a number of reasons that could happen. You use too much solvent when you were painting. So I think of what's called oiling out is we're putting oil back into the
Right.
paint film. Now I'm going to take a paper towel. I would take a lint-free rag if I was going to do
Right,
this, Amy,
right.
because I don't want,
Yeah, exactly. The
Right.
deposits of
yeah, you get a nice lint-free rag. But you take some artist painting medium, and what you do is you gently rub that back into it.
so what you're doing is adding a little bit of fat in those drier areas that'll
Absolutely.
absorb that, and then the solvent will kind of help it dry quicker.
Yep, solvent's going to evaporate
Right.
off, and I'm bringing oil back into it. So no different than if my hands are dry,
Right.
and I'm adding a moisture.
Right.
I think of it almost as a moisturizer
Yeah, yeah.
for your painting.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, Oiling out, that adding the oil back into it again is because something else is going on.
Right.
Again, you possibly used too much solvent, or possibly if you primed your own canvas and you didn't do a great job of it, and it's too absorbent.
Yes.
A lot of the oil is
Soaks right.
it's soaking
right
in there.
in.
And some people will say, well, why not just add a varnish? But what happens is we're not adding that oil back in there,
Right.
and then you're still going to
Yes,
have
you're still
different
gonna-
levels.
yep.
So just, and you don't need a lot, just a little, but you're just gently rubbing in there.
Well, people will say that too, that, they'll have really high areas of gloss and then areas that are matte. And oiling
Right.
out helps kind of more even that playing surface,
Mhm.
especially if you're working with a lot of gray values.
Yeah.
Where they're very close, but the color is just slightly different.
Yeah.
And they're matte, it's really hard to see what's what. And it's
Yes. Oh,
putting
yeah,
that
very much
to
so.
get that sheen that kind of helps you realize, oh, maybe your painting's further along than you think.
Yes. Yes.
Or it's not, but it kind of it's hard to tell. You
correct.
know?
Yeah. Correct.
It
Correct.
seems like, and this works so much better than just using, a retouch varnish. People a lot of times will use a retouch
Yeah.
varnish to try to do that, but
Yes.
it's so light. It's
Yeah, and the retouch varnish really is a more diluted picture varnish.
Yes.
Which is there for intermediate protection.
Right.
This is blending and glazing medium. So blending and glazing medium is what you would call a traditional 2-1-4
okay.
painting medium, right? So in that case, and I'm going to pour a little bit out here, we've got, ooh, see, look how
Yeah.
runny that is.
Yeah.
So in that case, the 2-1-4 is our oil,
Mm-hmm.
our varnish, and our solvent.
Okay.
So it's 2 parts oil,
Mm-hmm.
1 part varnish, which in this case is Damar varnish,
Mhm.
and then 4 parts solvent. So that's why it's quite
Yes.
runny like that. It's very, very pale.
I was gonna say it's harder to tell on the monitor, but this has just got a slight tint to it,
Slight, just
where
slight.
this is more water clear.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can actually see how those two kind of do what we did before. Just how
Yeah,
those run.
wow.
Look at how
Yeah.
that really
It was
runs
off and
down
running
the
quick.
surface a lot. Right. So blending and glazing medium, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anything that's going to move like that, it has a very quick movement to it.
Right.
Right. The viscosity is really able to brush out, so you can blend very
Right.
easily, and you can make glazes of color very, very easily with that.
But that's also going to dry much quicker too, because
Absolutely.
it's faster.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a leaner mixture
Yep.
too. And if you think about Stand Oil, when we first put that
Yeah.
out, how thick that
Yeah,
was, the 1-to-1 still obviously makes
Yes.
it much thinner, but it doesn't
Yes.
race across
No,
the surface
mm-mm.
like this. So once again, these are ready to go as is, out of the jar. Don't even have to think about that.
Right.
And I think the more that you learn about drying oils, the more you come up with recipes that might work for you. So, for instance, after many, many years, I used to like to make my oil paintings more matte.
Mm-hmm.
So what I used to do is I used to take beeswax, what we call cold wax. You'll see it sometimes. I would take a tablespoon of cold wax. I would put that in a jar with 5 parts solvent and let that dissolve.
Okay.
And then the wax made a matting agent.
Right.
And then I would add that to my linseed oil.
Nice.
Right. So I would have again this jar that was 5 parts solvent, 1 part cold wax, and that was off to the side. That's my
Right,
matting
right.
agent. And then over here in my little cup for painting, I'd put 2 to 3 parts of that to 1 part linseed oil, and it would give a much more matte finish to my oil
Nice.
paint, because that's not what you have with oil paint.
Right.
You tend to get a glossy.
Right.
a
Right.
glossy feel.
Right.
And the reason I did that, it was much easier for me to shoot photographs
Yes.
for the work.
Definitely.
And then later on with a picture varnish, if I wanted, a lot of those things I was doing just tended to, I wanted them to be more matte, and I could use a matte varnish, but I could also use a gloss one
Right.
if I wanted to bring that up a bit. So you kind of figure out those ratios along the way, but you don't want to push the extreme either way.
Right.
That's what oil paint does not love.
No.
It doesn't love extremes. Yes.
One of our viewers brought up the salt effect for watercolors.
Mm.
Is there anything that you can use with oils to get a similar effect?
Oh, so for anybody out there who is not familiar with that, the salt effect, so when you're using watercolors, obviously, you know, in the wintertime you throw salt down, right? Salt does what? It pulls the moisture out, and it leaves this sort of speckled effect with your watercolor. That's a good question, and I honestly, I don't have the answer. You stumped me. I don't have an answer to that one. I would have to actually check with some of my colleagues and see if they've experimented with something like that. I don't know anything offhand. I do know that if I used a much more of a dry brush technique or scumbling, right?
Yes.
Scumbling is when we use much more of a dry brush and we're dragging across the surface. You'll get areas that pick up the high points of the canvas and leave the low points, which can have maybe somewhat of a similar effect to that, but not the effect in which the salt just sucks up the moisture.
Because that's only water and pigment, so it's going to pull it very differently.
Yeah.
And where this, you don't want to be adding salts and things like that.
No.
And can do horrible things.
No. Yeah, you want to keep things pretty simple. That's the thing with your mediums too. You know, you don't want to be saying, well, I'm going to add some stand oil and then some poppy oil, and I'm going to drop a little liquid in there, and then I'm going to add some varnish, and then I'm going to add. You don't need to get crazy. It's I think almost everything that I think everything that we do really with art is very much like cooking in the respect. Use some quality materials.
Yes.
Keep it simple, and you get good results. And when you start to do things where your drying rates are polar opposite, then that's where you start to mess with things.
Asking for trouble.
Yeah, so you know, you go back to how we started this, and you've got your fat over lean, it's the thick over thin, it's the fast or slow drying over faster drying. It's knowing those ratios and keeping that pretty simple, and also don't get too nuts about it either. I find that people get so crazy about perfect ratios.
Right.
You know, like I said, a 5-to-1 a solvent to the stand oil. You can.
Yeah, if it's off a little, it's not nobody.
No, you don't have to have
no
mixing
painting.
cups here and do that. You can approximate, and you will be okay in that process. It'll work for you, and it'll be good. Yeah.
Well, this was fantastic.
Cool.
And I'm sure that they had a good time, didn't they? They probably were.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Jimmy breaks it down so everybody can understand it, and it's much. I mean, demystify it.
Oh, good.
Completely.
Yeah,
so this is fantastic.
You know,
We
again,
really
you can reach
appreciate
out to us. That's one of the things at WInsor Newton. You reach out to us, and we like to have somebody live who answers questions. If we don't know the answers, then we go to the lab.
Nice.
We try to find answers for you, or we try to dig into our technical library and do that as well. But I think the key thing is just get in your studio, mix around, play around, know what you're trying to do at the outset, and have some fun with it.
Awesome. Well, thank
Cool.
you again.
You're welcome.
And thank you guys for watching. Next week will be JL80. Oh, also, if you wanted to see, this is JL80. If you wanted to see any of the items, I was thinking two things and trying to blend them both together, that Jimmy used here today, any of the colors that you saw, maybe you're attracted to, you have to have Purline Black now, after seeing that.
Transparent white,
Yes.
that's a good one.
Go to our website, type in the search bar JL80. That will pull up the whole list of all the items we used here today. Next week is going to be episode 81, and it's going to be basic airbrush techniques with Brian Pope, who's one of our employees here. That episode's pre-taped so that I could get out of here for a week. But the week after, we'll be doing JL82, and it will be full-on AOC all week, pop-ins and outs. So join us for the next couple weeks, and if you've got any questions, put them here, and if we can't answer them, we'll get it to Jimmy and WInsor Newton, and they will have a crack at it for us.
And I have to come clean, Amy. When I did the first episode with you, I thought JL was Jimmy Leslie. And then I realized
he's like, wow, I'm such a superstar. I got my own code.
every single one is JL for Jerry's Live.
Oh, we just burst.
That was embarrassing.
It's okay. That's fantastic. That's great.
Yeah, somebody
All right.
thinks too much of
Yeah,
himself.
that's okay. That's okay. You deserve your own code.
Well, thank you, everybody.
We appreciate you guys tuning in.
Yeah.
We'll see you next week. Bye.